It's a common sense recap of the big stories. It's Katz and Cosby on 77 WABC.
And now we have Larry Kudlow, the country's leading, the number one economist in the country. Well, Larry, 42,000 market, half a point drop in the rate. What say you? What's going on?
Yeah, well, the Fed spiked the punch bowl, didn't they? They just spiked it.
It's an election year.
Yeah, and they kind
And
of
you thought they were honest.
They gave Kamala sort of a 50 basis point gift, an election gift. I mean, they could have done 25. I think there's an economic case for it. Not overly strong, but okay. 50 looked very political to me. I think they could have waited. The next meeting is the day after the election. I think they could have waited, but they decided not to. As I say, I think they could have done 25, but they gave her a 50 basis point little election gift. Stocks love it. Listen, stock markets, they love when you pour in the money supply and add liquidity, at least in the short term. One thing I want to say is my friend Nikki Bowman, who was a Trump appointee to the Federal Reserve Board, she issued a dissent. It was the first dissent, I think, in about 15 years. And she basically issued this warning. She said it's premature to declare victory over inflation. And I happen to agree with that, particularly if you're a middle-income family or a lower-income working family. They're still facing very high prices of 20% or 30% increases in the past few years. But whatever I think, that's what the Fed did. And the stock market liked it, and the Kudlow Trust liked it, even though Kudlow himself is not crazy about it.
I understand, but you got to look at it. The rate of inflation depends on one thing. Who is elected on November 5th? If Donald Trump is elected and he reduces the price of oil to $50.55, you know what happens? Then the price of food goes down, inflation goes down, interest rates go down, and inflation goes away.
Yeah, listen, I'm with you on that. In fact, hundreds of prices throughout the economy are affected by the price of oil and natural gas, but more oil. Hundreds are affected by petroleum. So if Trump if Trump does win and we get drill baby drill and permitting reform, and we go to 16 or 17 million barrels a day, which is where we should have been, oil prices will go down to $40. As you said, it'll cut them in half, and that will conquer inflation. But the problem is that hasn't happened yet. And the reality is
40, how many more days? 48 days? 47?
Yeah, less.
Yeah, I think it's 46 days are left. And I would just, we had Kevin Warsh on the show. He's a terribly smart guy, former Federal Reserve governor, and Wall Streeter, whom we all know, and I asked him if Kamala wins and she spends another $2 trillion as her economic speech suggested, and she raises taxes by $4 or $5 trillion, then you'll have too much money chasing too few goods, and the inflation genie will spring up once again. And there's another reason why the Fed could have waited, to be honest with you. Because the political outcome affects policy, and policy affects what the Federal Reserve does, fiscal policy, that is. So I thought it was all very curious, but for the moment it all seems wonderful if you own these stock indexes, as I do. But I always own them. I don't try to time them. I always own them.
You know, Larry, I want to ask you about this. This is making a lot of headlines from the Transportation Secretary, Pete Buttigieg. He's saying we're on pace. They did 8 EV charging stations, and it cost $7.5 billion. Are you kidding me?
Yeah, there's a lot, Larry, one thing you left out, there's a lot in this Biden-Harris budget that can be cut out. For instance, the part of the Green New Deal that they've passed. Just get rid of that. I mean, you begin to cut the deficit right away, and that's going to have an impact on inflation, bringing it down.
But then Pete Buttigieg would cry, because obviously he's on pace with 8 charging stations for $7.5 billion.
There's a lot of waste in it.
No, but wait, Rita, he said we're on pace for 8. You got to understand, this bill was passed 2 years ago for the $7.5 billion. Right now, there are 0 additional charging stations. 0. He's saying we're on pace.
Isn't that frightening? Isn't that frightening? I mean, the American public, to Ed's point, should be scratching their heads going, what are we spending our money on?
Right. It just, it shows you the ineptitude of government. And, back in the day, if you want to go back, and some of us are very old on this, when automobiles and gasoline, in the 1900s, the 1920s and so forth, the oil companies, Standard Oil and all the various subs of the Standard Oil Company, they built their own gas stations. They built their own. The government didn't build them. They built them, okay? Standard Oil built them. Mobil built them, or it was all Standard Oil. So that just goes to show you. And the landscape was dotted with gas stations. So now we allocated $7 billion. But to Ed Cox's point, that misnamed Inflation Reduction Act, right, that thing is really running over $1 trillion. It was originally estimated at a couple of $100 billion, which was bad enough, because the credits and the subsidies have no time limits, okay? So that thing, you could knock that out. You could save yourself $1 trillion. The country does not want a Green New Deal jammed down their throats. They do not want electric vehicles jammed down their throats. If you want an electric vehicle, I'm fine with it, but go on ahead and buy it. I just don't want taxpayers to subsidize it. If you want to build charging stations, I'm all for that. But why don't these companies build their own charge? By the way, I would bet you Tesla could build more charging stations faster than the federal government could.
And then you grow your way out of it, don't you? Out of the deficit, out of inflation. Yes. Isn't that the bottom line? And you don't do that by raising taxes. You cut them to do that.
What you want is that the ratio of federal debt to GDP, to the economy, you want to bring that ratio down. Okay? It's moving towards about 120%, okay, which is a peacetime record. Actually, it's heading for a wartime record, too, even though there's no direct wars. You want to just grow the GDP faster, and you want to slow down spending, and then the ratio will fall, and that's okay. Then we'll be fine. We can get that ratio down, below 100, 90%, 80%. You don't have to retire the debt. Just grow the economy and curb spending. You got the Musk Commission that Trump talks about all the time, like the Peter Grace Commission when Ed and I were working for Reagan. That's a very good idea. It's a very good idea, and I think Trump will follow through if he wins.
Larry, we'll be listening to you tomorrow between 10 o'clock and 1 o'clock Saturday, our number one show on Saturday with numbers going up to the stratosphere.
Thank you, John. Thank you, Rita. Thanks, everybody.
Have a great weekend, Larry.